Welcome to Soltron. This is the video review for Cyberverse Volcanicus. Here's how he scales with some other robots. So I bought this guy for 30 bucks. That's the same amount as a Voyager. And I think, despite how big he is, I think the Voyager is still kind of a better value. I guess they're about equal. Considering how much bigger this guy is, I can see how 30 bucks is stretched pretty thin. So I don't think he's a terrible deal for 30 bucks. Oh yeah, and then here's his box. It's got an open design so you can touch the figure. There's no plastic in the packaging, which is nice, except for the like rubber kind of twist ties that he's held in with. And then there's the back of his package. So he's about the same size as this Titan Grimlock, which I really enjoy. I think this guy retailed for $40 when he came out, and his articulation is just a lot better than Volcanicus. And then the plastic is also a lot nicer. He's got a good metallic sheen to it, where this is just a flat gray, which kind of matches the animated aesthetic, but I really prefer the way that Grimlock looks. Everything just looks a lot nicer with this guy. The $40 goes a bit further. And Volcanicus, he does have this one accessory, which is, of course, a tail weapon. I'm not sure which Dinobot's tail this is, maybe Grimlock's. But it's actually a pretty decent tail weapon because it does have this shaft that flips out to make it more of a weapon. So that's pretty decent because they could have just left it like this, and it could have just been something he held in his hand like this, and you pretend it's a sword. So not too bad. Not the worst thing ever, and this is actually a very important piece. This accessory is pretty vital if you ever buy this figure. So for articulation, he has no head articulation. He does have a waist swivel. You have to kind of open this tab that locks in his waist here, and then he can go pretty crazy with the waist swivel. It's very loose, so usually you want to have that button down to lock him in place. He does have a little bit of outward motion on the shoulder, like a really disappointing amount. And then he does have an elbow bend, which is about 90 degrees. And they make a good fake elbow in there. Unfortunately, he has a forearm swivel, so he does not have bicep swivel, so he cannot pivot out his bicep at all. He's just got this forearm swivel, which also helps with the waist. And then he's got pretty much 360 on this giant mushroom peg in here. But again, no real outward motion. And then his head does not have does not have any articulation either. And for his head sculpt, he's got kind of this jazz RoboCop looking kind of head sculpt. I like that the head is unique and it's not really just any of the Dinobots. And I was going to move on with the articulation, but that's actually all of his articulation. His legs and waist and hips do not have any articulation. All of this is basically one solid piece. So there's no articulation happening in there. So overall, I kind of do like this robot mode. I like the different elements that they have in here. So it looks like Grimlock makes up the chest and torso section. These are like Grimlock's biceps. And then Grimlock's head, of course. I don't know what robot is making these arms. I don't recognize these pieces at all. And then moving down, you have the Triceratops. I think that's Slug. And then you've got the Brontosaurus making up the other leg. And then the Pterodactyl Swoop is, of course, making up the wings. Maybe he makes up one of these arms and somebody else is supposed to make up another arm? I don't know. I don't know who I'm forgetting. But this is clearly like another dino's body with a tail. So I don't know where these arms are supposed to come from. And the back of the figure is pretty clean, so I appreciate that. These dragon legs just fold behind the robot legs, but there's really not a lot of kibble happening. And then he does have this gimmick with his Energon armor. So he's got these little notches here on his waist, kind of, and if you fold that down, his Energon armor will very softly deploy over his head and look like that, which covers up the T-Rex head and the robot head. So not a terrible gimmick. It's very subtle and it doesn't really get in the way, and you just push that back in back here, and you can see how it locks in right there, and then this part just springs down. And then he's got these two shoulder cannons, but they don't fold forward, so that's kind of a missed opportunity, as they always have to be pointing straight up. Overall, I'd rate this robot kind of a 6. He doesn't really do much for me. I think everybody would have been a lot happier if each one of the Dinobots was just a component that kind of would transform into a limb, like a Megazord. I think that probably would have pleased a lot more fans. Even if they didn't have a robot mode, they just turned from dinosaur into a limb. I think people would be much more interested in this figure, and that would have opened up a lot of his articulation. So the reason he has such poor articulation is because the transformation gimmicks. So to get him transformed, you just fold these forward, and then you're going to move these arms out of the way here. So these are going to become the dragon forelegs. And then that's pretty much all you need to do to get ready. So actually you need to get these dragon legs ready too. And then you're going to open up the waist articulation and rotate him 180. And then basically the last couple of steps of transformation is you're going to yank this whole section down, and it's going to make a lot of noises. And then this is a pretty strong spring, so you have to put a lot of force into it, but that'll lock the whole dragon torso into place. And then these shoulder spikes kind of block the wings, so that's a real issue. I don't know why it was designed that way. Alright, so that cleans up like the fore section, and then you have basically a dragon torso, and you're going to want to get the T-Rex head and move that forward. And then I couldn't figure out from the directions how you're supposed to keep this thing locked in place. I think you just yank it out a little bit and then push it down, and then it's locked in place. And you do have mouth articulation while we're at it. Oh, but this is also on a spring-loaded gimmick, so if you just tap it upwards, everything's just going to launch back into robot mode. So I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong. I think really you should just be able to pull this out and it should lock in place, but it doesn't do that. You have to push it down a little bit. And there you have most of the dragon mode already, and then finally you take the tail, and that's going to insert right here in this notch. And this tail is the whole key to the transformation, so that's a really vital piece of equipment. But there's this dragon mode. Not too bad. Interesting idea. It's not the worst Titan class Cyberverse figure transformation. And here's how he scales with the deluxe car. So that's a pretty good scale. That looks pretty good together. And then this is how he scales with Grimlock, which is not a good scale. Grimlock is obviously way too big for this, but I really like this Grimlock. So this alt mode really had some potential, but it's all kind of blown because of the gimmick. So I'd really rate this alt mode kind of a 5. It's pretty lackluster, and then there's just these robot legs just in the back. So it looks especially bad from back there. He does have articulated legs here. They are on a ball joint, but you can't really get the full ball joint effect with that. And then, unfortunately, these back legs are not painted at all, so they don't even really match the front legs. But interesting idea, just pretty poor execution. So the whole reason that this figure is kind of poor is because of the gimmick. So I'm going to pull out the tail, and that will activate his transformation. And there you go, that was the whole thing. So now he's pretty much transformed. You just lower the arms, and there you have his robot mode again. So that, unfortunately, comes at a cost to everything else. Okay, I loaded him up one more time, because it is kind of a fun gimmick. It's just too bad that it comes at the cost of everything else. And it did actually work out pretty well. I was surprised by how well he transformed with this gimmick. Okay, so you just have to hold the legs in place, pull out the tail. Oh, and I spoke too soon. He didn't rotate this time for some reason. But there you go. Interesting figure. If you're really into the gimmick, and you're okay with the articulation sacrifices, you should definitely get this. As a customizer, I thought that this guy had some potential, but it's going to be too much work for me to make this guy articulated, and plus I don't even like the robot mode that much in the first place. So I'm just going to return this guy to the store. But I'll see you next time, and that's it.